The air inside the luxurious private jet was thick with tension. The hum of the engines barely drowned out the soft murmurs of the passengers, each lost in their own thoughts, or the comfort of the high-end amenities. But for Andrea, the flight. Attendant, this was not just another trip. This was her breaking point. She stood in the aisle, her smile strained as she made her way down the cabin, offering drinks, snacks, and a quick exchange of pleasantries. Her uniform, perfectly pressed, hid the exhaustion that had been creeping into her bones over the past few weeks. Long hours, difficult passengers, and a sense of isolation. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. But today was different. Today, Andrea would snap. It started small, just a flicker of impatience, as she made her way to the front of the plane. A man in his late 50s, wearing a tailored suit and an air of entitlement, caught her attention. He had been rude from the moment he boarded, dismissing her greetings and eyeing her with the sort of disdain that made her skin crawl. But today, something in her snapped. "Excuse me, could I get another drink? And make it quick," he said, his voice sharp and condescending. Andrea took a deep breath, her hand tightening on the cart. She had learned over the years to hold her tongue, to grin and bear it. But the fatigue, the stress, the way this man was treating her, it all bubbled to the surface. She leaned in closer, maintaining her professional tone. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'll be with you in just a moment. There's a process, as I'm sure you understand." He scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You people are always so slow, just get it done already." Her heart raced. There was something about his tone, the way he spoke to her like she was beneath him, that set her off. The memories of her long hours and struggles as a flight attendant, dealing with passengers who thought they could treat her however they pleased, flooded her mind. She gritted her teeth and turned toward the back of the plane, muttering under her breath. But it was then that he crossed a line. As Andrea moved past him to assist another passenger, she felt a sharp tug on her arm. Before she could react, the man grabbed her wrist roughly. "Hey, I told you to get it done. What's your problem?" His grip tightened and a chill ran down her spine. Without thinking, Andrea spun around. Her hand shot out, delivering a quick, sharp slap to the man's face. The cabin fell silent. The other passengers froze, eyes wide in disbelief. For a moment, everything seemed to pause, as if time itself had decided to take a breath. Andrea stood there, her hand still trembling from the impact, her chest heaving with adrenaline. But what happened next was beyond anything she could have imagined. The man slowly lifted his hand to his face, where the red mark from the slap was already beginning to form. His expression was not one of anger or shock. It was one of amusement. And that's when Andrea realized something that made her stomach drop. This was no ordinary passenger. This was Chloe Rivers, the billionaire businesswoman, the owner of the entire plane, the woman whose name was on every major business deal, the woman who had a reputation that made even the most powerful people in the world tremble, the woman who could destroy her with a single phone call. Andrea's heart skipped, a beat as Chloe locked eyes with her. "So you don't know who I am, do you?" Chloe's voice was calm, almost playful, but there was a sharp edge to it. Andrea froze, her face paling. Her mind raced. She had just slapped the one person who could obliterate her life in an instant. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably as she stammered, trying to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Chloe smirked, slowly standing up from her seat. "You know, I've always wondered what it would be like to be treated like a normal person. For once. But this is interesting." Andrea's mind swirled with a million thoughts. What had she just done? Was her career over? Was she about to lose everything? She felt the weight of the situation crashing down on her, but Chloe's eyes softened, just a little, as if she was contemplating something deeper. "You've got guts," Chloe said, her tone now less mocking and more curious. "Not many people would do what you just did." Andrea stood there speechless as the plane continued its flight, heading into uncharted territory. This was no longer just a job for her. This was the moment that would change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Andrea had always been good at reading people. As a flight attendant, She'd developed the skill of quickly assessing a passenger's mood, needs, and expectations. It was a survival skill, one that had kept her afloat during the toughest days on the job. But right now, as she stood in front of Chloe Rivers, billionaire and the owner of the plane, Andrea couldn't read her. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to suffocate. The other passengers were pretending not to notice, their gazes lingering briefly before they quickly turned away, afraid to get caught in the drama. Andrea's heart raced in her chest, her palms sweating. She had never felt so out of control in her entire career. "Sit down, Andrea." "Let's talk," Chloe said, her voice surprisingly calm as she gestured to the seat next to her. Andrea hesitated for a moment, then slowly made her way over, her legs shaking. Sitting down in the plush leather chair beside Chloe felt like sinking into quicksand. Every inch of her body screamed at her to run, to leave the situation behind and pretend it never happened, but she couldn't. She was stuck. She had just slapped the woman who owned the jet, the woman who could change the course of her life with a single phone call. "I can't tell you how many people have tried to kiss my ass just to get on my good side," Chloe continued, her voice smoother now, almost casual. "And here you are slapping me in front of everyone. You're either incredibly stupid or incredibly brave." Andrea swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't know what to say, so she said nothing, her mind desperately scrambling for a way out of this mess. Chloe leaned back in her seat, her eyes studying Andrea carefully. "You know, I've been on this plane for years, and I can count on one hand the number of people who have actually treated me like a human being. Everyone's always either intimidated by me or looking for something. But you didn't flinch. You didn't kiss up to me. You stood your ground." Andrea still couldn't look her in the eye. The shame of what she'd done, the fear of the consequences, it was all too much. "I didn't mean to." "No, you meant to. And that's what's interesting," Chloe interrupted her. "Most people wouldn't dare, but you did. You were pissed off and you didn't hold back. I like that, it's rare." Andrea finally dared to meet Chloe's eyes. The cold, calculating gaze of the billionaire was now softened with an almost imperceptible smile. "I'm sorry, I just couldn't take it anymore. You don't know what it's like working day in and day out, dealing with people who think they can treat you however they want." Chloe's smile faded as she nodded slowly. "Actually, I do know. It's funny you say that. I've been through it. People look at me and see money, power, but they don't see the person behind it all. They don't see the struggles, the sacrifices, or the hard work it took to get here. They just think I'm untouchable." Andrea blinked in surprise. She had never imagined that someone like Chloe, so seemingly perfect, so untouchable, would have gone through struggles. But there was a certain honesty in Chloe's voice that made Andrea pause. "Why did you become a flight attendant?" Chloe asked, her eyes still studying Andrea closely. Andrea exhaled sharply, surprised by the question. I've always wanted to travel, but mostly I needed the job. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. It helps me get by?" Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Is that all? You're just getting by?" Andrea shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her mind struggling to process the layers of this conversation. I don't know. It's just what I'm good at. I don't know if I'm good at anything else." Chloe sat up straighter, the look in her eyes sharpening as she took in Andrea's words. "You think this is all you're good at? You're more than just a flight attendant. You have potential. And trust me, I know potential when I see it." Andrea looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Chloe leaned forward, her expression intense. "You don't even realize it yet, but I've been watching you. You're smart, capable, and you've got the guts to stand up for yourself when it counts. That's not something most people have, and you're wasting it here." Andrea's heart skipped. "What do you want me to do?" Chloe smiled again, her eyes glinting with something Andrea couldn't quite place. "I'm going to make you an offer, a chance to get out of this job if you want it. But first you need to prove to me that you're ready to take control of your life. You don't have to work in the service industry forever. You can have more than this, if you want it." Andrea stared at her, her mind a whirlwind. Was Chloe serious? Was she really offering her an escape from this life she'd felt trapped in for so long? Before she could respond, Chloe stood up, her gaze unwavering. Think about it, we're almost to our destination, and when we land you can make a choice. But remember, you'll have to make it fast. The finality in Chloe's voice made Andrea's stomach churn. She didn't know what to think, but one thing was clear. Her life was never going to be the same after this. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The rest of the flight felt like a blur to Andrea. She sat in her seat, staring out the window, the world outside moving in a blur of clouds and blue skies. Her thoughts were racing. What had just happened? One moment, she was a flight attendant doing her job, and the next, she was sitting next to a billionaire, receiving an offer that could completely change her life. Could she even accept an offer like that? What did she have to lose? A part of her, the part that had been struggling to make ends meet for years, was desperate for a change. She dreamed of doing more, being more. But the other part of her, the part that had been raised to be cautious, to play it safe, was terrified. Time's ticking, Chloe's voice echoed in her mind. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. What kind of opportunity was she really being offered? And why was Chloe giving it to her? They didn't even know each other. Andrea glanced at Chloe, who was seated a few rows ahead, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. Chloe was the epitome of confidence, strong, poised, and completely in control. She had everything: wealth, power, influence. And now she was offering Andrea a chance to escape from her mundane life as a flight attendant. But why? Was this a game? Was she testing Andrea? Or did Chloe genuinely see something in her? Andrea's head was spinning. The noise of the plane's engines felt louder now, filling her ears and drowning out her thoughts. She ran her fingers through her hair, taking a deep breath. She could walk away. Walk away and forget everything that happened. She could stay in her safe, predictable life. It was familiar, and the risk of stepping into the unknown was terrifying. But then a new thought struck her. What if she didn't? What if she took a leap of faith? What if she chose to take control of her own life, to finally stop being just a bystander in her own story? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Andrea was no stranger to tough choices. Every day she made decisions that impacted her life. But this was different. This was bigger than anything she'd ever faced. She remembered the slap, the way the man had grabbed her arm and mocked her, the way Chloe had stood there unfazed, but still offered her something. It wasn't just about the slap anymore, it was about the kind of person Chloe was, the strength she exuded, and the fact that she saw something in Andrea that Andrea herself hadn't seen in years. The flight attendants in the back of the plane were starting to clean up, getting ready for the descent. Andrea felt a rush of urgency. Time was running out. She had to make a decision. As the plane began its descent toward the private airport, Andrea stood up and walked to Chloe's seat, her heart pounding in her chest. Chloe looked up at her as she approached, her expression unreadable. "Have you made up your mind?" Chloe asked, her voice calm, but there was an underlying anticipation in her tone. Andrea paused for a moment, looking at Chloe, trying to read her face. She could see the power in Chloe's eyes, an almost magnetic pull that made Andrea want to trust her. But this was still a gamble, and Andrea knew it. She was stepping into the unknown, and there was no going back once she did. "I don't know what you see in me," Andrea said, her voice unsteady. "But I want to change. I want more. I'm tired of just getting by. I want to actually live my life." Chloe's lips curved into a small smile, and she nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping for." Andrea's heart skipped. She wasn't sure if she'd just made the best decision of her life or the biggest mistake, but she knew she couldn't go back. The plane touched down smoothly, and the ground crew immediately began to prepare for the next stage of the journey. Chloe stood up, adjusting her jacket, her gaze never leaving Andrea's. "Welcome to the next chapter of your life," Chloe said, her voice soft but powerful. "You'll be meeting me in my office tomorrow morning. I'll make sure you have everything you need to start fresh." Andrea's mind was still spinning, but the glimmer of possibility was there. For the first time in years, she felt like she was stepping into something bigger than herself. The two women disembarked from the plane, and Andrea couldn't help but feel a wave of anxiety wash over her. the sleek, black car that awaited them. At the tarmac looked like something straight out of a movie. The driver opened the door, and they both slipped into the back seat, the silence between them comfortable, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. As they made their way toward Chloe's office, Andrea couldn't help but wonder if this was real. Was she really about to enter the world of the powerful and wealthy? Was she ready for it? Chloe glanced over at Andrea, her sharp eyes observing the younger woman's unease. "You're going to be just fine," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. "You've got the potential to go far. Don't let your doubts get the best of you." Andrea nodded, but her mind was still in turmoil. They arrived at a sprawling office building, a stark contrast to the flight she had just been on. As they walked inside, Chloe led her to a sleek modern elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. Andrea could already feel the weight of the world changing around her. This wasn't just a job. This was an opportunity to redefine her life. The real question was, could she handle it? The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Andrea followed Chloe into the vast open space of her office. The room was everything Andrea had imagined a billionaire's office would be, sleek, polished, and filled with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the city skyline. It was a world away from the cramped, functional cabin of a private jet. The air was different here, heavy with success, with wealth, with power. Chloe moved with ease, her confidence filling the room as she walked toward her desk, which was sleek and minimalist, with just a few important-looking documents stacked neatly in one corner. She motioned to a chair across from her. "Sit. We have a lot to talk about." Andrea hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. She had spent so many years in her safe, predictable world, delivering drinks, making small talk with passengers, doing everything she could to avoid rocking the boat. But now she was sitting across from a woman who could make waves, big ones. "So I guess the real question is," Chloe said, her eyes narrowing slightly, "why should I take a chance on you? What do you bring to the table?" Andrea's heart raced as Chloe's gaze sharpened, as if evaluating her every word, every movement. The question hit her harder than she expected. She had been thinking about the opportunity, about what she could do with a new life, but now that the moment had come, she had to prove she was worthy of it. "I've always been a hard worker," Andrea said, her voice steady, despite the nerves building up inside her. "I'm loyal. I take pride in what I do, even when no one notices, and I don't give up, no matter how hard things get." Chloe listened intently, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the surface of her desk. She didn't interrupt. The silence was uncomfortable but purposeful. Andrea could feel the weight of Chloe's expectations, like the entire room was holding its breath. "And what about ambition?" Chloe asked, leaning forward just slightly. "What do you want to do, Andrea? What's your dream?" Andrea blinked, caught off guard by the question. She had never really allowed herself to dream big. She had always been so focused on surviving, getting by, just making it to the next paycheck. But now, sitting here in front of someone who had built an empire, the idea of dreaming, of doing something bigger than herself, seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. "I want to be more than just a flight attendant," she said quietly. "I want to build something. I want to have a career where I don't feel like I'm invisible, where I have a purpose beyond just serving people drinks. I want to prove to myself that I can be successful without having to rely on anyone else." Chloe studied her for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust her words. Then finally she gave a small nod, a subtle shift in her demeanor. "All right, I'll give you a chance. But understand this, Andrea. This isn't going to be easy. You'll be pushed, tested, and challenged in ways you've never imagined. You'll have to prove that you deserve to be here every single day. No shortcuts." Andrea's heart hammered in her chest. "I'm ready. I can do it." Chloe's lips curled into a slight smile. "Good. Let's see if you really are." She rose from her desk, walking over to a set of double doors at the far end of the room. She opened them, revealing a large conference table surrounded by sleek modern chairs. At the head of the table was a man in a sharp suit, his back to them as he flipped through a stack of papers. Chloe didn't need to say a word. The man immediately stood up and turned around, greeting her with a nod. "Jordan, meet Andrea," Chloe said, introducing her without much fanfare. Jordan extended his hand, his expression friendly but professional. "Nice to meet you, Andrea." "Nice to meet you," Andrea replied, shaking his hand firmly. "This is the first test," Chloe said, her tone firm as she gestured toward the table. "Jordan here is one of my top advisors. He handles a lot of the day-to-day operations for my companies. I want to see how you handle yourself in a high-pressure situation. He's going to give you a scenario, and I want you to solve it, no hesitation." Andrea felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. A test? Already? She wasn't ready for this. She was barely starting to grasp what was happening. And now she was supposed to jump straight into problem-solving mode, in front of someone who could make or break her future. But Chloe's piercing gaze locked onto her, and in that moment, Andrea knew she couldn't back down. She had to prove herself. She had to show that she was more than just a flight attendant. Jordan didn't waste any time. "All right, Andrea," he said, his tone direct. "Imagine you're the CEO of a growing company. You've just landed a major contract, but there's a catch. The client wants to restructure your entire team, and they've requested that one of your most senior employees be replaced with someone they've chosen. This could cost you valuable experience and loyalty, but if you don't comply, the deal falls through. What do you do?" Andrea took a deep breath, her mind racing. This wasn't a simple decision, and she knew that. But it was exactly the kind of situation she had seen time and time again, whether it was in the workplace or in her personal life. The choice between loyalty and growth, between standing firm and compromising for the sake of progress. She looked at Jordan, then Chloe, and finally back at the papers on the table. She had to make this decision carefully. There was no room for mistakes. "I'd negotiate with the client," she said, her voice steady. "I'd try to find a middle ground where we could keep the core of our team intact while also meeting their needs. But I'd make sure that any changes that were made were in the best interest of both the company and the client. If the deal is worth keeping, there's always a way to compromise without losing what matters." Chloe's gaze flickered with approval, and Jordan's lips twitched upward into a slight smile. "Interesting. I like your approach." Andrea's heart was pounding, but she felt a small sense of pride bubble up inside her. This was just the beginning. She hadn't just survived, she had made it through her first test. But she knew this was just the start. There would be more challenges ahead. And she had no intention of backing down now. Andrea had barely left the conference room when her mind started to race. She couldn't believe it. She had passed the test, even if it was just a small victory in the grand scheme of things. But the moment she stepped out of that high-rise office, the reality of what she was walking into hit her hard. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was stepping into a world she had never even dared to dream of, a world that operated on an entirely different set of rules, expectations, and pressures. Chloe had mentioned there would be challenges, but Andrea hadn't realized how quickly they would come. As Andrea stepped into the elevator and pressed the button to leave the EU building, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, seeing a message from an unknown number. "Urgent. Get to the office. We need to discuss the project update. Don't be late." The message was signed with the name Jordan, and her stomach dropped. Project update. Was she already being thrown into a major decision-making process? She had barely gotten her feet wet, and already the expectations were sky-high. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, Andrea exited into the bustling city street, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Her phone buzzed. Again, a second message from Chloe. "You have 1 hour to get here. Wear something professional. This is not a drill." Andrea stared at the screen for a moment, her palms sweating. This was it. The real challenge. She had to prove herself, and quickly. 1 hour later, Andrea was standing in front of a high-end boutique, feeling out of place in a stylish yet understated black dress and heels. She wasn't used to shopping for designer clothes, but Chloe's instructions had been clear. She needed to look the part. When the dress was a bit too expensive for her budget, she swallowed the guilt and paid for it, telling herself it was an investment. The office she was heading to wasn't just any office. It was Chloe Rivers' office. The same office she'd stepped into this morning, only now it felt far more intimidating. The polished steel and glass building was towering, its sleek design an embodiment of Chloe's success. Andrea couldn't help but feel a sense of awe, mixed with nerves as she entered the building. This was her chance to prove herself, not just to Chloe but to herself. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. When she arrived at the reception desk, a young woman looked up from her phone, smiling professionally. "You must be Andrea. Ms. Rivers is expecting you. Right this way." Andrea followed the receptionist down a long hallway. She couldn't help but notice how immaculate everything was. Modern art adorning the walls, marble floors gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and the faint hum of technology everywhere. It was the kind of place where decisions that affected entire industries were made on a daily basis. Andrea's heart beat faster with every step. As the receptionist opened a door at the end of the hall, she stepped aside. "Ms. Rivers is waiting for you." Andrea walked in, feeling a rush of nerves, but she forced herself to remain calm. Chloe was sitting behind a sleek desk, her eyes scanning through papers as she heard Andrea approach. "You're on time. Good." Chloe's voice was cool but approving. Andrea nodded, unsure of how to respond. I'm here, ready for whatever comes next." Chloe didn't smile, but there was a spark of something in her eyes as she motioned to the chair across from her. Andrea sat down, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. "You did well with the scenario earlier today, but this is different," Chloe said, sliding a folder toward Andrea. "This is about an actual live project we're launching, and you're going to be involved in it." Andrea looked down at the folder. Her curiosity piqued. Live project? Was she ready for this? She hadn't even known what Chloe's business really was, let alone how she could contribute. But she wasn't about to back down now. Chloe's eyes fixed on her as if reading her thoughts. "You've been here for one day and you've already made an impression. But now we need to see how you think under pressure. This project, it's risky, it's big, and we can't afford to fail." Andrea swallowed hard. The weight of the responsibility hit her square in the chest, but she refused to show it. She was in this to win it. "What's the project?" Chloe slid the folder over to Andrea, who opened it to find a detailed proposal for a tech startup Chloe was backing. It was a venture that involved a series of groundbreaking developments in artificial intelligence, with the potential to revolutionize the way businesses interacted with their clients. The document outlined projected outcomes, market analysis, and potential risks. But there was one problem that Chloe had pointed out, one that made Andrea's stomach drop. "The budget is tighter than we anticipated, and the timeline is shorter than we'd like," Chloe explained, tapping a pen on the folder. "We need a plan to solve both, and we need it fast." Andrea stared at the numbers and projections in the folder. Everything seemed so complicated, so far beyond her understanding. She was no expert in business, let alone in tech startups. She could already feel the pressure mounting, but Chloe didn't give her any time to think. "You've got 24 hours, get up to speed, meet with the team, make a plan. We'll see what you come up with. If you succeed, you'll earn your place here. If not, well, I won't have time to babysit." The ultimatum hung in the air. Andrea could feel the weight of it crushing her. Chloe was serious. This wasn't some casual opportunity. This was a test that would determine her future and possibly her entire career. Andrea took a deep breath. She wasn't about to back down. She could do this. "All right," she said, meeting Chloe's eyes. "I'll get it done." Chloe's lips curled into a small, approving smile. "I'll be waiting to see what you come up with." As Andrea left Chloe's office, the weight of the task ahead seemed even heavier. She had 24 hours. 24 hours to figure out a plan to save a project, prove herself worthy of this opportunity, and make an impact. The pressure was on. But for the first time in a long time, Andrea didn't feel afraid. She felt alive. Andrea could feel her pulse quickening as she left the sleek modern building, the cool evening air doing little to calm her nerves. Her mind was racing, overwhelmed by the pressure that Chloe had placed on her. 24 hours. That was all the time she had to turn the fate of a major tech project around, to prove she belonged in this world of high stakes and rapid decisions. She stepped into a cab, and gave the driver the address of the co-working space where the team behind Chloe's tech venture was based. The short ride felt like an eternity, the weight of the task ahead sinking deeper with each passing minute. Where do I even begin? As the cab navigated through the bustling city streets, Andrea's thoughts kept spiraling. She wasn't just up against Chloe. She wasn't even up against the pressure of this high-risk startup. No, Andrea was up against herself. She had never been in a position like this before. Her life, up until now, had been about keeping things simple, doing her job, staying in the background, staying safe. But now she had to take the lead. The cab pulled up to a nondescript building, its exterior not much to look at but buzzing with activity. This was where the magic happened. The idea that could change industries, change lives, was being nurtured inside these walls. Andrea paid the cab driver and stepped out, her legs feeling like they were made of lead. She had to be strong. She had to do this. As she entered the building and took the elevator up to the designated floor, her heart was pounding in her chest. The moment the elevator doors opened, Andrea was hit with the buzz of focused energy. The open plan office was filled with young professionals sitting at desks, their faces glued to computer screens, tapping away furiously on keyboards. The space was minimalist, but it was clear that everyone here was working on something big. There were whiteboards covered in diagrams, charts, and half-erased ideas, and every desk seemed to have a collection of empty coffee cups and energy drink cans. This wasn't a place for idle chatter or easy solutions. This was where challenges were faced head-on. A tall man in a polo shirt and jeans spotted her as she stepped off the elevator. He had a friendly but serious demeanor. "You must be Andrea. Chloe told me to expect you." He extended a hand. "I'm Ben. I run the operations team here." Andrea shook his hand firmly, though she could feel the nerves creeping back. "Hi, Ben. I'm here to learn more about the project." Ben raised an eyebrow. "More than that, actually. Chloe said you'll be helping us figure out how to keep things on track with this tight budget and schedule. If you're serious about this, I'd suggest you grab a seat. We've got a lot to do." He led her to a long table where a group of 6 people were gathered. There were laptops open. In front of them, papers scattered and coffee cups in hand. The mood was intense, but there was also a sense of camaraderie among the group. They were used to solving problems, and each one of them had a clear role to play in the project. "Everyone, this is Andrea. She'll be joining us for the next 24 hours to work through the project update. Let's bring her up to speed." The team's eyes turned toward her, and Andrea felt the weight of their expectations on her shoulders, but there was no turning back now. She sat down, pulled the folder Chloe had given her from her bag and spread it out in front of her. "All right," Ben began. "Here's what we know. We've got a tech startup that's making waves in the industry, but the client wants everything faster and cheaper. We've been pushing the boundaries with some of our AI development, but the timeline is getting tighter and the budget's shrinking." Andrea glanced over at the screen on the wall, where a detailed project timeline was being displayed. Her eyes darted from one section of the project to the next. The scope of the work was staggering. She flipped through the folder Chloe had given, her mind racing to keep up with the lingo and the technical jargon. AI, machine learning algorithms, scalable solutions, terms she had heard but never understood fully. But she couldn't let that stop her. She had been thrown into the deep end, and now it was sink or swim. Ben noticed her struggle and leaned in slightly. "Don't worry, you'll catch up. What's important right now is that you understand the core issue. We need to cut costs without cutting quality, and we need to deliver faster than we originally planned. Any ideas?" Andrea's mind went blank for a moment. Cut costs. Deliver faster. It was as though everything she had ever known in her career was irrelevant now. This wasn't about making sure people had their drinks on time or helping with cabin comfort. This was about building something that could change lives. There was no room for hesitation, no room for second-guessing. "Well," Andrea said slowly, "I think we need to prioritize. Let's focus on what's non-negotiable, what will make the biggest impact, and cut everything else that's not absolutely necessary. We can streamline the development process by outsourcing some of the tasks that aren't core to our expertise. We might also need to look into other funding options to fill in the gaps." The team exchanged glances, and Ben raised an eyebrow. That's actually not a bad idea. Outsourcing could reduce some of the internal workload, but what about the budget cuts? How are we going to deal with those? Andrea felt a wave of uncertainty, but she pushed it down. She had to keep moving forward. We could identify areas where we can work smarter, not harder. Maybe invest in automation for certain processes or renegotiate contracts with some of our third-party vendors. There's always room to negotiate when it comes to price, especially if we're able to demonstrate the value we're providing. Ben nodded slowly, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. All right, I like it. Let's start putting together a more detailed plan for outsourcing, renegotiation and automation. Andrea, you'll need to help us with that. You're officially on the team now. Her heart skipped a beat. On the team, just like that. She had proven herself in the moment, but this was only the beginning. There was so much more to do. The group immediately got to work. Andrea threw herself into it, absorbing everything she could about the project, asking questions and pitching in where she could. The hours flew by, and with each passing minute, Andrea's confidence grew. She wasn't just learning, she was contributing, and with every new task, every solution, they found Andrea realized something crucial. She was part of this. She wasn't just the outsider anymore. She had earned her place here. As the clock ticked down, the team worked late into the night. By the time the sun began to rise, Andrea had helped craft a plan that was both ambitious and feasible. A balance between maintaining quality and meeting deadlines. She hadn't just survived the challenge, she had thrived. The next morning arrived with a quiet, uneasy tension hanging in the air. Andrea had barely slept, her mind constantly replaying every decision made, every plan hashed out during the marathon session with the team. She wasn't used to this constant pressure, the weight of knowing that the success of the project and possibly her future at Chloe's company was riding on what she'd helped put together. As she arrived at the office building again, the sky was still dark with the remnants of night, and the first rays of daylight were just starting to break through. Andrea was running on caffeine and adrenaline, but she knew it wasn't enough. The next 24 hours would determine everything. This was the moment where she would either sink or swim. She entered Chloe's office once again, this time with more resolve. Ben was already there, pacing as he checked his phone and glanced at the clock. He looked up as Andrea walked in. "Everything okay?" he asked, his tone more serious than usual. Andrea nodded, though inside she was still battling with her doubts. "I think so. We've got a solid plan. We've managed to identify key areas for outsourcing and renegotiating contracts. We've also streamlined the development process, focus on automating as much as we can. The team's on board." Ben's face softened just a fraction. "Good. But we need to make sure Chloe is on board too. She's the one who calls the shots, and we can't afford any last-minute surprises." Andrea's heart skipped a beat. Chloe, the woman who had given her this opportunity, this life-changing chance. Chloe's opinion was everything. "Let's just hope she likes the plan," Andrea said, forcing a smile. Ben raised an eyebrow. "Oh, she'll like it, but it's not just about liking it. She wants results. She's not patient with mistakes or second-guessing." Andrea took a deep breath and nodded. "I understand." When Chloe walked into the meeting room a few minutes later, she wasted no time with pleasantries. Her presence was commanding, every movement purposeful, her sharp eyes scanning the group with a focus that left no room for error. "So," Chloe said, her voice low and steady, "what do you have for me?" Andrea stood up, holding the project, binder in one hand, her other hand resting on the table as she faced Chloe. She could feel the eyes of the team on her, waiting, hoping she wouldn't stumble. "We've reviewed the project in detail, and we've come up with a comprehensive plan," Andrea began, her voice calm despite the storm of nerves inside her. "We're cutting unnecessary costs by outsourcing some of the non-core tasks. We've also renegotiated some vendor contracts, and we've identified areas where we can automate processes to save time and money. The timeline is tight, but we believe we can meet the deadline." She paused, allowing Chloe to absorb the information, and watched as Chloe's eyes flickered over the document Andrea had provided. The silence stretched on, and Andrea's mind raced. Was it enough? Was Chloe satisfied? Chloe's gaze never wavered. And what about the risks? You can't ignore them. Andrea's stomach twisted, but she stayed composed. We've accounted for the risks and built contingencies into our plan. The biggest concern right now is the budget. But with these adjustments, we're confident we can stay within the allocated limits while still delivering the quality expected. Chloe's lips pressed together as she continued to review the details. The room was quiet, the tension thick enough that it felt like even the walls were holding their breath. Andrea's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to hold steady. This was her moment to prove herself. She had to get this right. Finally, Chloe closed the binder with a soft thud. "You've done well, Andrea. I'll give you that." Andrea exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Chloe's eyes met hers, a flicker of approval in her otherwise stoic expression. But approval isn't enough. Results are what matter. Make sure the team follows through on this. Andrea nodded, feeling the weight of Chloe's words. "We will. We've already put the plan into action." "Good," Chloe said. She turned to the rest of the room. "I expect updates every hour. We can't afford to fall behind." With that, Chloe stood and left the room as quickly as she had entered. The team relaxed, the air in the room shifting from intense focus to a momentary release of tension. Ben walked over to Andrea, clapping her on the shoulder. "You did it. Chloe's not easy to impress, but you pulled it off." Andrea gave him a small smile. "I don't know if it's enough, though. She still expects results. We can't stop now." Ben chuckled. "That's the spirit. But don't worry. We've got this." Over the next several hours, Andrea worked with the team to finalize the details and ensure that everything was falling into place. The pace was relentless, the pressure never easing. As each challenge arose, Andrea took it in stride, solving problems on the fly, coordinating with vendors, and ensuring the team stuck to the new plan. Despite the frantic pace, Andrea began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. With each decision, each challenge overcome, she felt more capable, more like she belonged in this world. She wasn't just a flight attendant anymore. She was part of something bigger. As the hours ticked down, Chloe called another meeting. This time, Andrea wasn't nervous. She had worked through every challenge, and now it was time for the final test. When Chloe walked into the room, the team was ready. They had done everything they could, and now they just had to deliver. Chloe stood before them, looking over the work they had done. There was no immediate approval or disapproval on her face, just a quiet, calculating look. "You've worked hard, but there's one more thing we need to do: the presentation to the investors." Andrea's heart raced again. Investors. The very people who could make or break this entire project. "Ben, Andrea, you're in charge of the presentation. Get it ready for tomorrow morning." The challenge had grown even bigger. Now, it wasn't just about surviving the project. It was about convincing the investors to back them and to back Andrea's vision. As the meeting wrapped up, Andrea was once again left with a sinking feeling in her chest. But this time, she didn't let it take over. She had come this far. And she wasn't about to back down now. The day had arrived, the moment when everything would either fall into place or shatter. Andrea's palms were sweaty, her heart beating in a steady drum of anticipation. The meeting with the investors was in just a few hours, and every part of her wanted to doubt herself. But she couldn't afford that. Not today. Not now. She stood in front of a large conference table, the presentation slides projected on the screen behind her. Ben was beside her, looking calm as always, despite the weight of the situation. Chloe was in the room too, watching with that cold, assessing gaze she always seemed to have. It made Andrea feel like she was constantly under a microscope. "We've got this," Ben whispered to her as the investors began trickling in, the murmurs of small talk filling the room. Andrea took a deep breath, trying to shake off the nerves. She had poured everything into this, every last ounce of energy, every decision, every late night. She wasn't about to let fear take over now. The investors filed in, sharply dressed, with an air of confidence that only wealth and success could bring. They were the kind of people who could change the course of a business with a single word. They were here to decide whether Chloe's vision and Andrea's efforts were worth their time, their money, and their faith. As they took their seats, Andrea noticed the lead investor, a middle-aged man with silver hair and sharp features, eyeing her with a particular intensity. She had seen this man around the industry, known for his quick decisions and unyielding standards. The tension in the room was palpable as the last of the investors took their seats. Chloe stood up first, her presence commanding the room. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today. We're excited to share the progress we've made," Chloe began, her voice steady and authoritative. "But more than that, we're here to present the future of this company. The innovation we're working on has the potential to change the game." Chloe's pitch was crisp, her words deliberate and confident. She outlined the vision for the company, the breakthroughs they had made, and the competitive edge they had, carved out in a crowded market. She spoke with the kind of certainty that only someone who had built an empire could possess. But Andrea knew that Chloe's vision was only part of the equation. It was the hard work of the team, her hard work, that would turn that vision into a reality. When Chloe finished, it was Andrea's turn to take the stage. "Good afternoon," she started, her voice steady, despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. She turned to face the investors. "What I want to share with you today isn't just a product. It's a promise. A promise that we will deliver what we said we would, that we will overcome obstacles, and that we will push the boundaries of what's possible." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in. The investors watched, some skeptical, others intrigued. Andrea could feel their eyes on her, measuring, evaluating. "We've streamlined our processes to ensure we stay on budget," Andrea continued. "We've renegotiated key contracts, cut unnecessary costs, and identified efficiencies that allow us to deliver results faster, without sacrificing the quality that we're known for." She clicked the remote, changing the slide to one that illustrated the projected savings, timeline, and key milestones they had achieved in the last few days. Andrea watched as the investors scanned the data, nodding and taking notes. "But that's not all," she added, her voice growing a little bolder now. "We've also put in place safeguards to address the risks. We know the challenges ahead of us. We know there's still work to be done, but we're ready for it. This isn't just a plan on paper, it's a blueprint for success, one that's already in motion." The lead investor raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you so confident that your team can execute this? We've heard pitches like this before. We need results." Andrea met his gaze without flinching. "Because we've already started executing. Our team has already delivered the first round of deliverables ahead of schedule. We're committed, we're focused, and we're prepared to take on whatever comes our way." The investor studied her for a moment, and then turned his attention back to the rest of the team. "And the team, are they ready to keep up with this pace?" Ben stood up and nodded. "Yes, we've already set up a clear communication plan to keep everything on track, with daily check-ins to ensure we stay aligned. And we've built a culture of accountability. Everyone on the team knows their role and is committed to the success of the project." The lead investor leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled together as he considered their words. The room went quiet, each person holding their breath, waiting for the final verdict. Finally, the lead investor spoke again. "All right, we're interested, but we need one thing from you: transparency. We want to know if something goes wrong, and we want to know immediately." Andrea's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment they had been working toward. "We'll be transparent," Andrea said firmly, "every step of the way." The lead investor gave a slight nod, then turned to the other investors. "Let's vote." Andrea's mind raced as they deliberated. She exchanged a quick glance with Chloe, who didn't seem the least bit concerned. But Andrea could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air, the future of the company, her future, resting on this very moment. After what seemed like an eternity, the lead investor turned back to them. "We're in. We'll offer you the funding, but remember, we'll be watching closely. Deliver as promised, and this will be a partnership for the long term." Andrea felt a wave of relief wash over her. They had done it. They had secured the investment. Chloe turned to Andrea, a rare smile playing on her lips. "Well done. You've earned your place here, Andrea." Andrea nodded, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. This was just the beginning. But she had proven herself, and that was something she would never forget. The excitement of securing the investment still lingered in the air as Andrea walked out of the conference room, her head spinning from the whirlwind of the presentation. She felt like she had been holding her breath for hours, but now that it was over, she could finally let it out. The team was celebrating, and even Chloe seemed to relax a little, her normally composed demeanor softening just a touch. But as Andrea stood in the hallway, the weight of the situation started to settle in. The deal was done, the money was secured, but it was only the beginning. There was still so much to prove. Ben caught up with her as she was about to head back to her desk. He gave her an enthusiastic slap on the back, nearly knocking her off balance. "Great job. You crushed it in there," he said, his voice full of genuine admiration. Andrea smiled, feeling the praise wash over her like a warm blanket. But it didn't erase the gnawing feeling in her stomach. She still had so much more to do, and every step from here on out had to be flawless. "Thanks, Ben, but it's not over yet. We still need to deliver." Ben chuckled. "I think Chloe's right about you. You're all business, aren't you?" She just shrugged. "I'm focused on the results. We're on the right track, but we can't afford to slack off now." As they entered the office, Chloe was already standing by the conference room door, her phone in hand. Her eyes flicked toward Andrea and Ben as they approached. "I need to speak with you, Andrea," Chloe said, her tone not quite as warm as before. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. She followed Chloe into the conference room, her mind racing. Had she said something wrong? Did the investors have second thoughts? Once the door closed behind them, Chloe turned to face Andrea, her expression unreadable. "You did well today," Chloe began. "But I want you to know this is just the start. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, and I'm expecting more than just good results. I need you to think big." Andrea felt a jolt of excitement. Was this the moment? Was Chloe finally seeing her as more than just a team member? "I'm ready," Andrea said, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened with anticipation. Chloe studied her for a moment, and Andrea could feel the weight of her gaze measuring her every word. Then, unexpectedly, Chloe dropped the bombshell. "I'm bringing in someone new to help us with the next phase of the project," she said, her voice cool and businesslike. "I'm assigning you to work closely with her." Andrea blinked in surprise. "Someone new? Who?" Chloe didn't hesitate. "Her name is Sasha Thompson. She's a consultant with a long track record of turning around large-scale projects. I expect you to collaborate with her, learn from her, and help implement her strategies." The mention of Sasha Thompson hit Andrea like a ton of bricks. She had heard the name before. Sasha was a legend in the industry, known for her no-nonsense approach and impressive success rate. But she was also known for being tough, demanding, and difficult to work with. "Okay," Andrea replied, trying to hide her unease. "I'll make sure we're on the same page." Chloe's eyes softened just slightly. "I'm giving you this responsibility because I believe in your ability, but I also need you to remember that the stakes are higher than ever now. We can't afford to fail." Andrea nodded, her mind already racing with the implications of what Chloe was asking. It was clear that she would have to step up even more. Working with Sasha would be a challenge, especially if her reputation was anything to go by. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, emails, and preparations for the next phase of the project. Andrea's team was buzzing with energy as they transitioned into the next stage, but there was something unsettling about it all. Despite the progress, Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something big, and that something came sooner than expected. It was late one afternoon when Andrea received a call from Chloe's office. "Can you come to the conference room, please?" Chloe's voice was clipped, urgent. Andrea's stomach dropped. She glanced at her phone. She had just been buried in spreadsheets and project plans. She hadn't had a chance to even think about anything else. What was happening now? She headed down the hallway to Chloe's office, her mind racing. When she walked in, she was surprised to find not only Chloe and Ben, but also Sasha Thompson sitting at the head of the conference table, looking as composed and intimidating as Andrea had imagined. "Sit down, Andrea," Chloe said. There was something different in her tone, something colder. Andrea sat glancing at Sasha, whose piercing eyes never left her. "Listen carefully," Chloe began. "We've been offered an opportunity that could speed up everything we're working on, but it's a risky move. We'd be securing a large partnership with a global player in the industry, but they want exclusive rights, and they've made it clear they want someone who's been in the business longer to lead this next phase." Andrea felt a wave of tension flood the room. "Are you saying you want to bring someone else in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chloe's eyes locked onto hers. "I'm saying we need to be strategic. Sasha has been brought in to help guide us through this next phase. She's an expert at managing high-stakes negotiations like this, and you'll be working directly with her." Andrea's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a new assignment, it was a direct challenge to her role. The prospect of working alongside Sasha was both an opportunity and a threat. Chloe continued, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "We're moving fast now, the stakes are higher than ever. If we want to win this, we need to adapt quickly. Can you handle that?" Andrea's mind raced. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. She had already come so far. There was no way she was going to back down now. "Of course," Andrea said, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." Chloe gave a single nod. "Good. Now let's make this happen." As Andrea left the room, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. The road ahead had just gotten even more treacherous, but she wasn't going to back down. She would prove herself, not just to Chloe, but to everyone who had ever doubted her. The days following the meeting with Chloe felt like a blur of strategy, sessions and high-stakes conversations. Andrea had never worked under this kind of pressure before. Every decision seemed to carry the weight of the future on her shoulders. And now, with Sasha Thompson officially brought on board, the pressure was even greater. Sasha's reputation as a turnaround specialist had both intimidated and intrigued Andrea. The woman was a force to be reckoned with. Every move Sasha made was calculated, every word carefully chosen. She had a razor-sharp focus that could dissect any problem, but she also didn't suffer fools easily. That first morning working with Sasha was intense. The moment Andrea walked into the conference room, Sasha was already seated, flipping through a thick binder filled with reports. The woman barely looked up as Andrea entered. "Sit," Sasha said, her voice clipped and no-nonsense. Andrea did as instructed, unsure whether she was being scrutinized or simply being ignored. "We're making a major move," Sasha began without preamble. "I've gone over the details of this partnership. This isn't just about a financial boost. This is about positioning the company as a leader in the market. If we do this right, we're looking at global dominance in less than 2 years." Andrea nodded, trying to match Sasha's intensity. "And how do we do that?" Sasha didn't waste time with pleasantries. "First, we need to revamp our pitch to the potential partner. They've expressed interest, but they want more details, more guarantees. They won't settle for vague promises. They need a clear, actionable plan." "Got it," Andrea said, feeling the gears in her mind already spinning. This wasn't just about making promises. It was about delivering something tangible, something that could not only convince the partner, but also the investors that they were on the right track. Sasha slid a report toward Andrea, a series of data points and projections. "Start with this. I want a complete breakdown of our timelines, milestones, and key performance indicators, and I want it ready by tomorrow morning." Andrea glanced at the paper, her mind immediately starting to process the numbers. Understood. As the day wore on, the pace quickened. Andrea found herself in back-to-back meetings with different departments, making sure everything was aligned, ensuring that the plan was moving forward with precision. Every step felt like a tightrope walk. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. By the time the sun began to set, Andrea was exhausted. She barely had time for a break, but that didn't matter. She had her sights set on something bigger now. This wasn't just a job. This was her chance to prove to everyone, especially Chloe and Sasha, that she belonged at the top. The next morning, Andrea was the first one to arrive at the conference room, as was becoming her routine. She wasn't sure whether it was the growing tension in the air or her own nervous energy, but she was determined to impress Sasha. The clock was ticking and they had to be prepared. As Sasha walked into the room, she glanced at the detailed report Andrea had prepared. For a moment, Andrea held her breath, waiting for Sasha's judgment. The woman flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the information quickly. "Not bad," Sasha said finally, her voice unreadable. "But you're missing the key risk analysis here. This needs to be tighter." Andrea's heart sank slightly, but she didn't let it show. She had anticipated some criticism. She nodded. "I'll revise it. What exactly are you looking for?" Sasha didn't look up as she tapped her fingers on the table, clearly deep in thought. "I want to see the potential risks, financial, operational, and reputational, and how we plan to mitigate them. Don't sugarcoat it. I need to know what could go wrong and how we handle it." Andrea's mind immediately shifted into overdrive. She'd been so focused on the positive aspects of the deal, the exciting projections, that she had neglected to fully account for the possible pitfalls. It was a rookie mistake. "Got it. I'll have it updated by the end of the day," Andrea replied, determined to prove she could take the heat. Sasha gave a curt nod. "Good. I'll be waiting for it. And make sure you keep your team in the loop. Everyone needs to be on the same page. No surprises." Andrea nodded, feeling the pressure mounting. As Sasha left the room, Andrea exhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. This wasn't just about handling the day-to-day tasks anymore. It was about stepping up, about showing her ability to lead in high-pressure situations. And that meant making this partnership work, no matter what. Hours later, Andrea was hunched over her laptop, tweaking the risk analysis document with her team. The pressure was overwhelming, but she couldn't let up. They had to get this right. Ben popped his head into her office. "How's it going?" Andrea looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "I'm almost done. Sasha wants a more detailed risk plan. I think we've got most of it covered, but I need to make sure nothing slips through the cracks." Ben smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "You've got this. We all believe in you." Andrea appreciated the reassurance, but she couldn't afford to rest on her laurels. Not yet. Not until the deal was sealed, the partnership secured, and the company on a path to domination. By the time she finished the risk analysis and sent it off to Sasha, it was late in the evening. She slumped back in her chair, exhausted but satisfied with the work she had done. She had taken the challenge head-on, but now she needed to prove that she could handle the next curveball that was sure to come. The next morning, Chloe summoned Andrea to her office for a quick meeting. As Andrea entered, Chloe was already sitting at her desk, looking unusually serious. "We've got some news," Chloe said, her voice steady but carrying an edge Andrea hadn't heard before. "The partner is interested in moving forward, but they're demanding a meeting next week. We need to present something bigger, something game-changing, and it has to come from you." Andrea's stomach tightened. "What do you mean by game-changing?" Chloe's eyes locked onto hers. "We need to show them that we're not just another startup. We need to show them that we can lead the entire industry. I'm putting all my faith in you. Don't let us down." Andrea's heart hammered in. Her chest. The stakes had just gotten even higher. She wasn't just walking a tightrope now, she was climbing a mountain. But Andrea wasn't about to fall. The pressure that had been building for days was now palpable. Andrea's heart raced as she walked out of Chloe's office. The task ahead was monumental. This was the opportunity to not only secure the partnership, but also solidify her place in the company. There was no turning back now. As Andrea returned to her desk, her mind spun with the weight of the new responsibility. Game-changing. Chloe's words echoed in her mind. What could she possibly do to impress a global partner that hadn't already been done? She needed something bold, something extraordinary. But what? She leaned back in her chair, staring at the blank screen in front of her. The clock ticked, each second more suffocating than the last. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. It was a message from Sasha. "Sasha Thompson. We need to meet tomorrow morning. Prepare something visionary, no more safe bets." Andrea let out a deep breath. Visionary. Sasha wasn't asking for just another plan. She was asking for something that could change the entire landscape of the business. And with the stakes higher than ever, there was no room for failure. The next morning, Andrea arrived at the office early, her mind racing with ideas. But nothing felt right. Every concept she came up with seemed too small, too typical. How could she create something revolutionary that would make them stand out to a global partner? By the time Sasha arrived, Andrea had already gone through half a dozen drafts, each one more uninspired than the last. "Morning," Sasha said as she sat, across from Andrea. Her sharp eyes assessed Andrea's work before she spoke again. "What do you have for me?" Andrea paused, biting her lip. She had nothing that felt worthy of Sasha's expectations, but she couldn't let that show. She couldn't afford to look weak. "I've been working on some ideas, but I feel like I'm missing something." "Something big," Andrea admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. Sasha raised an eyebrow, clearly unamused. "Missing something big? You have two options. Find that something big, or we fail." "You're a smart woman, Andrea. I know you can do this, but you need to push beyond what's comfortable." Andrea knew Sasha was right. This was her moment to prove that she could lead, that she could think outside the box. The safe choices were behind her. It was time to take a risk. She took a deep breath. What if we don't just pitch a partnership? What if we create a movement? A way for our company to redefine how the entire industry operates, not just by making more money, but by setting new standards, shaping the future. Sasha leaned forward, intrigued but cautious. "Go on," Andrea continued, her voice gaining confidence. "We could present a vision for a completely new business model, one that shifts how we interact with our clients, how we provide value, how we leverage technology to create something sustainable and forward-thinking, something that challenges the status quo and makes us the leaders in this space, not just another player trying to keep up." Sasha's gaze softened just slightly, but Andrea could tell that she was still evaluating the idea. "That's bold," Sasha said slowly. "But it's also risky. If you're going to go down that path, you need a detailed blueprint. You'll need to explain how this transformation will unfold in phases, how we'll handle the transition, and how we can guarantee success. The partner will want numbers, results. They won't just buy into a dream." Andrea nodded, feeling a renewed sense of urgency. "I can do that. I'll refine the details, but this is the direction we need to go in. It's not just about selling a service, it's about selling a new way of thinking." "Good," Sasha said, standing up. "I'll be waiting for your presentation. Don't disappoint me." The next few days were a blur of meetings, research, and brainstorming. Andrea barely had time to eat or sleep. She was consumed by the idea, her mind racing with possibilities. Every moment of the day felt like a test, a crucial step toward making this vision a reality. Her team rallied behind her, but the pressure was immense. The clock was ticking, and Andrea knew they had only a few days left to finalize the proposal. Ben was there, as always, offering support. "You're on fire, Andrea, I can see it, you've got this." But despite the reassurance, Andrea couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. She wasn't just crafting a business model, she was crafting a legacy. What if she was wrong? What if they failed? At times, her doubts were overwhelming. She found herself pacing around her office late into the night, trying to make sense of everything. How could she make this partnership not just work, but make it a game changer? Then one evening it came to her. She knew what they needed. Andrea scribbled frantically, the ideas flowing faster than she could write them down. The blueprint was taking shape. She could see it clearly now. The transformation, the strategy, the future. It wasn't just a business deal anymore, it was a revolution. By morning she had finished the proposal. It was bold, it was visionary, and it was the risk of a lifetime. But the stakes had never been higher. The moment of truth was almost here. The day of the presentation arrived faster than Andrea had anticipated. The meeting room was set up with a sleek, modern feel. A few of the company's senior executives had gathered in anticipation. But most importantly, the global partners' representatives were already seated, their faces impassive, their eyes steely. This was no ordinary pitch. Sasha stood by the door, her eyes scanning the room. "Let's make this count," she said, a rare hint of approval in her voice. Andrea took a deep breath as she walked to the front of the room, her proposal in hand. The room fell silent as she began. She laid out her vision, starting with the future of the industry, showing the shortcomings of the current models, and explaining how their company was uniquely positioned to lead the charge. She outlined every detail of the new business model, the phases of transformation, and most importantly, the risk analysis that Sasha had insisted on. Every word felt like a challenge, every slide a step toward changing everything. She saw the investors' skeptical expressions, but she powered through knowing that they needed to hear this. At the end of the presentation, there was a long silence. Andrea's heart pounded in her chest as she awaited their response. Then the head of the Global Partners team spoke. "We're impressed," he said. "This is bold, but it's exactly what we've been looking for." Andrea's breath caught in her throat. Had they really bought into it? "But we have one condition," the executive continued. "We need you to deliver in half the time. We want this transformation completed within a year. Can you do it?" The room held its breath. Andrea's mind raced. She knew the answer. "Yes," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "We'll do it." As the meeting concluded, Andrea felt a rush of exhilaration. They had done it. They had secured the partnership. But this was only the beginning. The real work, her real test, was about to begin. The excitement from securing the partnership was short-lived. As Andrea walked back to her office, she could already feel the pressure of the next phase building. They had a year to deliver the transformation, and while she felt a momentary thrill from the success, her mind was already on the long, difficult road ahead. The deal was signed. The ink was barely dry when the real work began. Sasha called an emergency meeting the moment the agreement was official. The executive team was already buzzing with excitement as they sat in the conference room. Andrea took her seat, feeling the weight of the moment, knowing that everything she had worked for was about to take shape. "All right," Sasha said, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "The deal is done. Now we turn our attention to execution. We have a year and we're going to need to break this down into manageable phases. No room for error. Andrea, this is your baby. You'll be leading the charge." Andrea swallowed hard. The responsibility was immense. She had proven herself up to this point, but now she would be the one who would either make or break the project. The eyes of the company and the global partner were on her. "Ben," Sasha continued, "you'll be working closely with Andrea. This will be a full team effort, but Andrea is the one steering the ship." Ben gave Andrea a reassuring smile. "We've got this, Andrea. We've done the impossible before." She appreciated his confidence, but the weight of Sasha's words didn't allow her to bask in it for long. This wasn't just about putting together a plan. It was about executing flawlessly, under intense scrutiny, with zero tolerance for failure. As the weeks passed, Andrea's life became a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and late-night work. The transformation that they had promised the global partner was nothing short of monumental. They were not only overhauling the company's internal operations, but also shifting its entire market position. It was a full-scale rebranding, a new business model and a technology upgrade, all rolled into one. There was no room for mistakes. Each day, Andrea met with different teams to ensure everything was on track. She was now more of a project manager than anything else, juggling multiple aspects of the transformation. Her phone rang constantly, emails piled up, and the stress was starting to take its toll. Ben often stopped by her office, bringing her coffee and checking in to see if she was holding up. His quiet support meant the world to Andrea, but even he could see how hard she was pushing herself. One evening, as she was going over a financial report for the umpteenth time, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sasha Thompson. "We need results. The partner is getting impatient. You've got a week to show significant progress, or they'll pull out." Andrea stared at the message, her stomach sinking. They were already under pressure, but now the countdown had begun. The global partner was starting to doubt them, and with the stakes this high, Andrea knew she couldn't afford to disappoint anyone. She quickly called a meeting with Ben and their key team leaders. The air in the room was thick with tension. As Andrea laid out the situation, "We have 1 week to show progress. That means we need results, real, measurable progress, within the next few days," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I know it's been a tough road so far, but we're running out of time." Ben nodded, looking equally determined. "We've got a solid plan. We just need to keep pushing through. We've handled tough situations before. This is no different." Andrea wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more the enormity of the task seemed to hit her. The team was working hard, but the transformation was so massive that even the slightest hiccup could derail everything. As the meeting wrapped up, Andrea returned to her office, trying to calm the storm of anxiety brewing inside her. She stared out the window, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. This was what she had always wanted, an opportunity to prove herself. But now that it was here, the reality of the situation was far more daunting than she had anticipated. Her phone rang again, cutting into her thoughts. It was Chloe. "Hey," Andrea answered, trying to sound upbeat despite the pressure mounting on her. "How's it going?" Chloe asked, her tone light but knowing. "Any progress?" Andrea hesitated, but then told Chloe the truth. "We're working hard, but we're running out of time. The partner is getting impatient. They want results within a week or they might pull out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Andrea could almost hear Chloe weighing her words. Finally, she spoke. "You've done the hard part, Andrea. You've gotten this far, and that's no small feat, but this next week, it's going to define everything. You've got to show them that you can deliver. I know you can do it. You just have to keep pushing." Andrea closed her eyes, hearing the sincerity in Chloe's voice. For a moment, it felt like everything would be okay. But then the reality of the situation came crashing back. "Thanks, Chloe. I'll do whatever it takes." The next week was a blur of frantic work. Andrea barely left the office, and her team followed suit, working around the clock to meet the deadline. Each day felt like a race against time, and the pressure to perform was relentless. Everyone was exhausted, but they all knew what was at stake. As the week drew to a close, Andrea finally felt like they were ready to present the progress they had made. They had revamped their technology infrastructure, initiated a partial rebranding, and started rolling out the first phase of the new business model. There were still challenges ahead, but they had made tangible progress. The day of the meeting arrived. Andrea stood in front of the global partners team, her heart pounding. She knew that their future hung in the balance. The presentation was flawless. Every detail accounted for, every metric met. By the end, Andrea could see the shift in the room. The skepticism had faded, replaced by cautious optimism. The partner's representative leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "This is impressive," he said, after a long pause. "You've shown significant progress, and we're willing to move forward, but there are still concerns. We need you to continue at this pace, or we'll be forced to reconsider the partnership." Andrea nodded, her throat tight. They weren't out of the woods yet, but this was a victory. They had shown progress. And that was enough, for now, She left the meeting, her phone buzzed once more. It was a message from Sasha Thompson. "Well done, but the real work starts now. You've got one more shot to prove you can keep this up." Andrea let out a breath, her heart still racing. It wasn't over yet, but she had made it this far. She could do this. She had to. As the week after the meeting dragged on, Andrea found herself on the brink of exhaustion. The whirlwind of meetings, deadlines, and endless work was beginning to take a physical toll on her. She hadn't had a full night's sleep in days, and the constant pressure to perform at her best was wearing her down more than she cared to admit. Despite the success of the presentation and the green light from the global partner, Andrea knew that this was only the beginning of an uphill battle. The real work had only just begun. The promise to transform the company and meet the partner's expectations was a burden she carried alone, and it felt heavier each day. The stress of the job seemed to seep into every part of her life. At home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cold, lonely space. She hadn't seen her friends in weeks, and when she did manage to squeeze in a phone call, it was brief and unfulfilling. She was too tired to even try to maintain the relationships she once held dear. One evening, after another grueling day at the office, Andrea collapsed onto her couch, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a constant whirlpool of deadlines, decisions, and demands. The pressure was crushing. She had never felt more alone in her life. She missed the person she used to be, someone who could handle challenges without crumbling beneath them. But now she was constantly on edge, haunted by the fear of failure. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Ben. Ben Carter. "Hey, I was thinking about grabbing dinner tonight. You in? We both could use a break." Andrea hesitated for a moment, the idea of a quiet dinner and a chance to unwind tempting her. But then the fear of falling behind in her work crept in. She couldn't afford distractions, not now. But after a few seconds, she typed a reply, Andrea Simmons. "Actually, yeah, I think I need a break. I'll meet you at 7. Dinner with Ben was a rare chance for Andrea to let her guard down. They sat at a cozy restaurant just a few blocks from the office. The dim lighting and soft music provided a welcome respite from the constant stress of the office. For the first time in what felt like weeks, Andrea let herself relax, even if just for a few hours. Ben noticed her exhaustion the moment she sat down. He gave her a knowing look, his concern evident. "You look like you've been running on fumes, Andrea." "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice soft but direct. Andrea forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, just a lot on my plate right now. You know how it is." Ben studied her for a moment before continuing. "You can't keep pushing yourself like this. You're one of the smartest people I know, but even you need to recharge sometimes. You've been going non-stop for weeks. You're going to burn out if you're not careful." Andrea let out a tired sigh. "I don't have a choice. The partner is expecting results and we're on a tight deadline. If I don't give 110%, the whole project could fall apart." Ben reached across the table, placing his hand on hers in a comforting gesture. "I get it, but you don't have to do this alone. You've got a team behind you and you've earned their trust. You can delegate. You don't have to carry the entire weight of this by yourself." Her eyes softened at his words. "I know. I guess I just don't want to let anyone down, not Sasha, not the partner, not the team." "You won't let them down," Ben said gently, "but you've got to take care of yourself too. You're not going to do your best work if you're running on empty." Andrea looked down at their hands for a moment, contemplating his words. He was right. She knew it. She had always prided herself on being able to handle pressure, but maybe she had been pushing herself too hard. Maybe it was time to ask for help. She couldn't do this alone, not forever. The conversation lingered in her mind long after dinner. She returned to her apartment feeling slightly more at ease, but the pressure was still there, just beneath the surface. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. A dozen emails greeted her, each more urgent than the last. She could feel the familiar tension building in her chest as she sifted through the messages. But this time, something inside her clicked. Maybe it was Ben's words, or maybe it was the realization that she couldn't keep going at this pace. She stood up abruptly and walked toward her phone. It was time to make some changes, starting with how she approached the work ahead. The next day at the office, Andrea called a meeting. With her team, Ben, Sasha, and several department heads were gathered around the conference table waiting for her to speak. There was a new determination in Andrea's eyes as she looked around the room. "I've been thinking a lot about the direction we're heading in," she began, her voice steady but firm. "I know we've been pushing hard to meet deadlines, but I've realized that I've been trying to do too much on my own. From now on, we're going to be working as a true team. I'm going to delegate tasks and trust each of you to lead your areas. We're all in this together, and we need to operate like a well-oiled machine." Sasha raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the shift in Andrea's approach. "I didn't expect this. Are you sure you want to give up some control?" Andrea nodded. "I've always been hands-on, but I can't do it all. I need your expertise. We need to play to our strengths and trust each other. If we're going to make this work, it's going to take all of us. No more trying to do everything myself." Ben gave her an encouraging smile. "This is the right move, Andrea. It's what the team needs." Andrea looked at each member of the team, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. They were with her, and she was ready to let them carry more of the burden. It was time to work smarter, not harder. As the days passed, Andrea's new approach began to take shape. She delegated tasks more freely, checking in with her team regularly, but trusting them to handle the details. It was a difficult adjustment, but it felt right. She had to learn to let go, to stop being the bottleneck in the process. And slowly, she started to see results. The team was more motivated, and their efficiency skyrocketed. The stress that had weighed so heavily on Andrea's shoulders began to ease as she realized that leadership didn't mean carrying the entire load. It meant empowering others to step up and contribute. She still had a long way to go. The deadline loomed closer every day and the pressure was relentless. But for the first time in weeks, Andrea felt like she could breathe. She wasn't alone in this anymore. And that, she realized, made all the difference. After weeks of frantic planning and delegating, Andrea finally felt like the pace was slowing, if only slightly. The pressure hadn't entirely lifted, but she was starting to find a rhythm. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she could take a breath without feeling like the weight of the world was pressing down on her chest. She had learned something crucial over the past few weeks. Leadership wasn't about doing everything yourself. It was about guiding the team, empowering them, and trusting that they would rise to the challenge. With each passing day, her confidence in her team and in herself grew stronger. But just as things were beginning to feel like they were falling into place, a new challenge emerged. It came in the form of a phone call early one morning. Andrea was still half asleep when her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She groggily reached for it, only to see an unfamiliar number on the screen. "Hello?" she answered, her voice thick with sleep. "Ms. Simmons?" The voice on the other end was cool and professional, though there was an edge of urgency to "Teosu, this is Linda Harrington with Global Logistics Group. We need to speak with you immediately regarding the contract we've signed." Andrea's stomach dropped. She sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "What's the matter? Is there a problem with the contract?" "We've received some alarming information," Linda replied. "It appears there are discrepancies in your company's financial reports. I'd like to discuss them in person as soon as possible." Andrea's mind raced. Discrepancies? How could that be? They had double-checked every number, every piece of data before presenting the partner with their plans. What could have gone wrong? "I'll be in the office in an hour," Andrea said, her voice now sharp with focus. "Please hold that thought. We'll resolve this." The next hour felt like a whirlwind. Andrea quickly showered, dressed, and made her way to the office, her mind buzzing with questions. As she entered the building, she was greeted by Ben, who looked just as concerned as she felt. "What's going on?" he asked as they headed for her office. "I don't know yet," Andrea replied, her pace quickening. "I just got a call from Global Logistics. They said there are discrepancies in our financial reports. I need to figure out what happened." Ben's face tightened. "That doesn't sound good. Do you think it's a mistake?" Andrea shook her head. "It's hard to say, but we can't afford any mistakes right now. If they pull out because of something like this, it'll be over." They spent the next few hours combing through the financial reports, looking for any inconsistencies or errors, but everything appeared to be in order. The numbers matched, the projections aligned, and there was no obvious issue. Andrea felt a sense of dread settling in her chest. If the numbers were right, what was the issue? By the time Linda Harrington arrived at the DU office, Andrea's nerves were shot. The woman was sharp, her expression unreadable, and she had an air of authority that made Andrea feel small by comparison. "We've reviewed your reports," Linda said once they were seated in the conference room, "and while most of the data checks out, there is a significant discrepancy in the projections for your company's revenue growth over the next year. Your estimates are vastly overstated." Andrea's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The numbers were based on market trends and our projected strategy. We've done everything by the book." Linda's eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid that's not the impression we're getting. We've had our analysts review your projections, and they're showing significant inflation. I'm not accusing you of anything, Ms. Simmons, but this could be a huge problem if it's not addressed quickly." Andrea felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. If the projections were off, even by a small margin, it could undermine everything they had worked for. The entire partnership could be in jeopardy. She looked at Ben, who was sitting beside her, his face pale. "Do you think it's a mistake?" he asked quietly. Andrea didn't answer at first. She was too focused on the numbers, trying to reconcile everything in her mind. If the projections were inflated, but she couldn't see how that could have happened. Everything had been checked and rechecked. I don't know, Andrea said finally, but I'll get to the bottom of this. So after the meeting with Linda, Andrea and Ben met with the finance team to go over the projections once again. Hours passed, but the more they looked, the more Andrea felt like they were running in circles. There was no mistake, at least none, that anyone could find. That night, Andrea barely slept. She tossed and turned, her mind racing with all the potential consequences. If the discrepancies weren't a mistake, then what could they be? Could someone have tampered with the reports? Was this sabotage, or was there something else at play here? By morning, Andrea had a headache that felt like it was splitting her skull. She needed answers, fast. She called an emergency meeting with Sasha, Ben, and the finance team. The tension in the room was palpable as Andrea laid out the situation, outlining the discrepancies in the projections and the potential fallout if they couldn't find a solution. Sasha's face was hard to read. "You're telling me there's nothing wrong with the numbers, that they were completely accurate?" "That's what I'm saying," Andrea replied. "Everything checks out on our end, but I don't know why Global Logistics is claiming otherwise. We need to get to the bottom of this before it blows up." Sasha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in thought. "Have you considered that this might be a power play? Maybe they're trying to backtrack on the deal for another reason." Andrea's gut twisted. Could this really be a tactic to undermine the deal, or was there something more insidious happening behind the scenes? "I don't know," Andrea admitted, "but we can't let this fall apart. Not now, not after everything we've invested." As the days passed, the pressure continued to mount. Andrea spent every waking hour trying to resolve the issue, but no answers seemed to materialize. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a crisis, and she was running out of time to solve it. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, she received another call. This time it was from the global partner. Andrea stared at the phone in her hand, the words of the global partner echoing in her mind. The call had left her shaken, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and confusion. "We need to discuss this immediately," the voice on the other end had said, its tone flat and businesslike. "There are concerns that need to be addressed before we can proceed any further." The coldness of the conversation felt like a slap in the face, especially after everything they had been through to get to this point. Andrea had been so sure that the partnership was a done deal, but now it felt like it was slipping through her fingers. She quickly dialed Ben's number, trying to steady her nerves as the phone rang. "Ben," she said when he picked up, her voice strained. "We need to meet. Now." The moment Ben walked into her office, Andrea could tell he was just as tense as she was. He shut the door behind him, his face set in determination. "What happened?" he asked. "It's worse than I thought," Andrea replied, her mind still reeling from the call. "The global partner called. They want to meet in person to discuss the discrepancies, and they're not happy about it. This could mean everything's falling apart." Ben's expression softened and he walked over to her desk. "Okay, calm down, let's take a step back. You've handled tougher things than this." Andrea let out a frustrated sigh. "I thought I had it under control, Ben, but now I'm not so sure. I've checked the numbers again and again, and they're right. I don't know why they're suddenly questioning everything." Ben placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "We'll figure it out, but you can't carry the weight of this all by yourself. You've got an entire team behind you." Andrea's eyes met his, and for a moment, she saw the unwavering support that had been there all along. It was a reminder she desperately needed. "Right," she muttered. "But who can I trust to help me figure this out?" Ben didn't hesitate. "Let's talk to Sasha. She knows these projections inside and out. If anyone can find the problem, it's her." Andrea nodded, feeling the weight on her chest lift slightly. Sasha had been a rock through this whole process, and her experience with financial forecasting was exactly what they needed. If they could just find the source of the discrepancies, maybe they could salvage the deal. Sasha arrived at Andrea's office within the hour, looking every bit as determined as they were. After hearing about the call from the global partner, she wasted no time diving into the financial reports. "We'll get to the bottom of this," Sasha said as she pored over the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It's possible there's a simple error buried somewhere in these projections. Let me check with the analytics team and see if we missed anything." Andrea nodded, grateful for Sasha's quick thinking. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Sasha." Sasha gave her a small smile. "That's what friends are for, right?" The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and data checks. It felt like they were unraveling a complicated mystery. Every lead they followed turned out to be a dead end, but Sasha's persistence was paying off. Finally, as the sun began to set, she called Andrea and Ben into her office with a look of triumph on her face. "I found something," Sasha said, holding up a series of reports on her tablet. "It's not a mistake in the projections, but rather a miscommunication. Between our team and the global partners' data analysts, they were using outdated market trends for some of their calculations." Andrea let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "So, it's not our fault?" "Not exactly," Sasha replied, looking at her with a slight grin. "We just didn't align our data properly. Their analysts were using figures from 6 months ago, and we didn't update ours accordingly. It's a simple fix." Ben leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "That's a relief. We just need to update the numbers and present the corrected projections, right?" Sasha nodded. "Exactly. We'll have to send an updated report, but the good news is that we're not as far off as they thought. This isn't a crisis. It's just a misunderstanding." Andrea felt her shoulders relax for the first time in days. "Thank you, Sasha. You just saved this entire deal." Sasha smiled. "We're a team. That's what we're here for." The next morning, they sent the corrected projections to the global partner, along with an explanation of the data misalignment. It wasn't long before they received a reply, an invitation to meet in person, not for a cancellation of the deal, but to discuss the new information and finalize the partnership. Andrea felt a rush of relief flood over her. The storm that had loomed over her for days was finally starting to clear. She wasn't out of the woods yet, but this was a step in the right direction. As the meeting with the global partner loomed on the horizon, Andrea took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. She had been tested more than she ever thought possible, pushed to her limits, facing down a crisis that threatened to undo everything she had worked for. But in the end, she hadn't faced it alone. With Ben, Sasha, and the rest of her team behind her, Andrea had managed to navigate through the storm. She had learned to lean on others, to trust in her team's abilities, and most importantly, to believe in herself. It wasn't always easy, but it was the only way forward. As the day of the meeting approached, Andrea felt a quiet confidence growing within her. She had fought through the toughest challenges, and now it was time to finish what she had started. She wasn't just going to survive this, she was going to come out stronger on the other side. The meeting with the global partner was scheduled for 2 p.m. Andrea stood in front of the mirror in her office, adjusting her blazer and trying to steady her breath. Her heart was pounding, but she wasn't about to let her nerves show. This meeting was crucial. It was the moment that would decide whether the partnership would proceed or collapse. Ben had just left the office on his way to meet with a few of their investors to update them on the situation. Sasha had stayed behind to handle some last-minute data analysis and finalize the revised projections. Andrea was alone now, but she didn't feel entirely alone. The support of her team was like an invisible shield around her, giving her strength when she needed it most. She had come a long way since the first day she set foot in the company. From the self-doubt and fear she had initially felt to this point where she could face the storm head-on with confidence. But there was one final obstacle ahead, one last hurdle to clear. As Andrea stepped into the sleek conference room at the Global Partners headquarters, she immediately felt the tension in the air. The room was filled with well-dressed executives, some of whom she had met during previous negotiations, others she had only seen in passing. Their faces were stern, unreadable, as they looked over the documents in front of them. At the head of the table sat Linda Harrington, the woman who had first raised the concerns about the discrepancies in the financial reports. Her eyes flicked up when Andrea entered, and she gave a curt nod in acknowledgement. "Ms. Simmons," she said in her usual professional tone, I trust you've brought the updated information we requested. Andrea gave a firm nod. I have, and I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me today to resolve this issue. Linda's eyes narrowed slightly, but she gestured for Andrea to take a seat. As Andrea settled into her chair, she noticed the way Linda was studying her, calculating, assessing. It made Andrea feel as if she were under a microscope, but she wasn't about to let that rattle her. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. These are the updated projections, as well as an explanation of the data misalignment. We've double-checked everything, and I believe you'll find the numbers now align with the most current market trends. If you need any further clarification, I'm happy to go over it with you. Linda didn't immediately look at the folder. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on Andrea, her lips pressed into a thin line. You've made quite an adjustment, Linda said, her voice low and deliberate. I'll admit, I'm impressed by your quick response. But let's be clear, I'm not here to play games. This partnership is critical to both of our companies, and I need to be sure we're not rushing into something that could ultimately harm us. Andrea's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. I understand the gravity of the situation, and I assure you, we've done our due diligence. This is not just a correction. It's a reflection of our commitment to transparency and long-term collaboration. We value this partnership and are fully invested in its success. Linda picked up the folder and started scanning through the documents. The room fell silent as Andrea waited, her hands clasped together tightly on the table. Every second felt like an eternity, but she didn't flinch. She knew this was the moment of truth. Finally, Linda looked up. It seems your projections are in order now, but this doesn't change the fact that we've invested significant time and resources into this deal. You understand what's at stake, don't you? Andrea nodded. Absolutely, and that's why I'm here today, to ensure that we're on the same page moving forward. I know that mistakes can happen, but what matters is how we handle them and what we do next. For a moment there was a tense silence, and Andrea wondered if Linda was weighing her words carefully. Then the woman leaned back in her chair and folded her arms across her chest. I'll give you credit, Ms. Simmons, Linda said after a long pause. You've shown resilience throughout this process, and that counts for something. But resilience alone doesn't guarantee success. The next step will be critical. We need to know that you can maintain the same level of transparency and accountability as we move forward. Andrea took a deep breath, meeting Linda's gaze without hesitation. I'm not asking for your trust, I'm asking for an opportunity to prove that we are worthy of it. We're ready to move forward with this partnership, and we're ready to do whatever it takes to make it successful. There was a shift in the room as Linda seemed to consider her words. The tension wasn't gone, but it had lessened slightly. After what felt like an eternity, Linda spoke again. All right, she said, her tone softening just a fraction. We'll move forward with the partnership, but I want to make one thing clear. This is your last chance. If any further discrepancies arise, or if we find ourselves questioning your transparency again, this deal is off the table. Andrea nodded, her heart racing in her chest. Understood. I will ensure that everything goes smoothly from here on out. As Andrea walked out of the meeting room, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't over yet. There would still be challenges ahead, and the scrutiny from the global partner would remain. But they had made it through this test, and they had come out on the other side stronger and more united. Ben and Sasha were waiting for her outside the conference room. The looks on their faces told her everything she needed to know. They had heard the outcome before she even said a word. Well? Ben asked, his voice filled with anticipation. Andrea couldn't help but smile. We're moving forward. They're in. But it's still a tightrope. We've got to prove ourselves every step of the way. Sasha clapped her hands together. That's what I like to hear. We've got this. For the first time in what felt like forever, Andrea allowed herself to relax. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't facing it alone. With her team by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The sun was beginning to set as they walked out of the building, and Andrea paused to take in the moment. It had been a long, exhausting journey, but she had come out of it stronger and more confident. And most importantly, she had proven to herself that she could rise to the challenge. The journey wasn't over, but now, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way. Andrea should have been celebrating. The partnership was back on track. The revised projections had been accepted. Her team was energized. The momentum was building. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't dreading waking up each morning. But then, just as things seemed to settle, it came, a letter, hand-delivered. No logo, no return address. It was waiting on her desk when she arrived at her office that Monday morning, tucked inside a plain manila envelope. The paper inside was folded crisply, almost too neatly, like someone had taken time to make sure it made an impression. There was no greeting, no closing, just one sentence. "Do you really think the numbers were your biggest problem?" Andrea stared at the words. No name, no signature, just that. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't just cryptic, it was personal. It was meant to rattle her, and it was working. She read the sentence over and over, trying to make sense of it. Was it a threat? A warning? A game? She grabbed her phone and dialed Ben. 15 minutes later, Ben burst into her office, his eyes immediately darting to the envelope still sitting on her desk. He picked it up carefully, scanning the letter. "This is not good," he said slowly. "It's not just weird, it's intentional. Whoever wrote this knows something, and they want you to feel it." Andrea crossed her arms tightly over her chest. "But what do they know? What are they talking about?" Ben looked up at her, his brows furrowed. "Have you made any enemies lately? Someone who could have been involved in that data mix-up?" Andrea shook her head. "We were all focused on the projections, and that mistake wasn't even ours. It was a misalignment with the partner's own data." "Exactly," Ben said, pacing now. "So why would someone try to scare you after we've already fixed everything? It doesn't make sense unless it was never about the projections." Later that afternoon, Andrea called Sasha into her office. She handed her the letter, watching her reaction closely. Sasha read it silently, then looked up with a frown. "I've seen this kind of thing before. Corporate intimidation, someone's trying to psych you out, maybe even tank the deal before it goes live. People in high-stakes deals do desperate things." Andrea raised an eyebrow. "You think this is sabotage?" "I think it's possible," Sasha said. "And you've got something they want. Power, leverage, a seat at the table with billionaires. Some people would rather burn the table than let you sit at it." Andrea tried to focus on work, but the letter haunted her. The words stuck in her mind, gnawing at her confidence. Every email, every phone call, every conversation suddenly felt loaded. Was someone watching her? Was there someone on her team not playing fair? Paranoia started to seep in, subtle at first. A pause too long from a coworker. A missed meeting that used to be routine. Even the way people looked at her in the hallway started to feel different. But Andrea wasn't the same person she'd been just a few months ago. She wasn't going to shrink under pressure. Not this time. She scheduled a meeting with IT security. Quietly. No one else needed to know. For now. 2 days later, the head of cybersecurity sat across from her, a serious expression on his face. "Did a sweep," he said. "Nothing unusual in your email, but we did find something else." Andrea tensed. "What is it?" "Someone's been accessing archived financial reports from 6 months ago, around the time you started working, on the global partnership pitch." Andrea frowned. That data should have been locked. Who accessed it? The IT lead hesitated. It was someone from internal finance. Their credentials were used, but the access happened after hours and from a remote IP. Andrea's mind began to race. Someone had pulled outdated data, just like the kind that caused the mix-up with the global partner. Could that have been intentional? A planted discrepancy? And then it hit her. There was only one person with enough clearance to access those files remotely, and who'd been unusually quiet ever since the data issue first arose. Matt, he was on the finance team. Smart. Quiet. He kept to himself most of the time, but he'd been there for years, long before Andrea arrived. And he'd always seemed resentful of change, of her. Andrea stood up. "I want to talk to him now." Matt sat across from her in the small meeting room, a nervous smile on his face. "Hey, Andrea, what's going on?" Andrea didn't sit. She looked down at the printed report in her hand, the one IT had flagged. "Matt," she said calmly, "why were you accessing archived financial data last month?" Matt blinked. "What? I wasn't." "We traced the login to your credentials. After hours remote access." A pause, then he smiled just a little too casually. "That must have been a mistake. Maybe I left my laptop on or—" "Don't lie to me, Matt," Andrea said, her voice low but sharp. "Did you plant the outdated projections?" Matt's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. His smile dropped. "I didn't plant anything," he said finally. "I just ran the numbers. It's not my fault if they were used. In the pitch. You all were moving too fast. I figured someone would catch it. You knew they were outdated," Andrea said, "and you didn't say anything." Matt looked away. "Maybe I was tired of being overlooked, of decisions being made without us. People like you come in, get handed the spotlight, and the rest of us who built this company get left behind." Andrea stared at him. "So you jeopardized everything? The deal, the company, the people counting on us?" "I didn't think it would go that far." Andrea didn't say anything at first. She let the silence hang, heavy and cold. "You're done here," she said finally. "Pack your things." Andrea sat alone in her office later that night, the city lights glowing outside the window. It wasn't over. There would still be fallout, conversations with legal, internal damage control. But she had made it through. Again. She had confronted a betrayal and stood her ground. More importantly, she had trusted her instincts, and now she knew exactly who she was. She was the kind of woman who didn't just survive. She led. Just when? Andrea thought she had regained control on the ground. The sky decided to test her next. The company's newly restructured international division had its official launch event scheduled in Dubai, a high-profile invite-only affair with business, leaders, investors, and press. Andrea was to arrive ahead of her team to meet with key stakeholders and finalize some contracts. So on a brisk Wednesday morning, Andrea boarded her private jet, her jet, technically, though she rarely thought of it that way. It was a tool, a necessity of her position now. She had long stopped marveling at the leather seats and personalized menu. Now she reviewed spreadsheets mid-flight and measured time in deliverables, not hours. But this flight, it wouldn't be like any other. Everything seemed normal at first. The jet was quietly humming across the Atlantic. Andrea tucked into her seat, reviewing final drafts of the expansion documents. Across from her sat Rachel, the flight attendant. From that infamous slap weeks ago, the slap neither of them spoke about, Rachel had been unusually quiet the past few trips. Professional, yes, but colder, efficient. Her friendliness replaced by formality. Andrea didn't blame her. She hadn't apologized properly, not really. And every time she thought about it, guilt crept up her spine like static. Andrea closed her laptop and looked across the aisle. "Rachel?" The flight attendant stopped mid-step and turned slightly, her brows raised. Andrea cleared her throat. "I owe you a real apology. I was out of line that day. No title or situation justifies treating someone like that." Rachel stared at her for a moment, processing. Then slowly she nodded. "You had no idea who I was." Andrea half smiled. "Not at all. I was a nightmare, but I've learned a lot since then, most of it the hard way." Rachel's expression softened. "Well, it has been quite a few flights since then." "You've been respectful, different," Andrea chuckled. "It's amazing how getting knocked down changes how you treat people." Rachel smiled now too, just a flicker of something real. "Would you like anything before we hit turbulence?" she asked. "The captain says we'll be passing through a choppy patch soon." Andrea shook her head. "I'll just buckle in, thanks." Turbulence. At first it was the usual light bumps, a few rattles, nothing dramatic, but then came the drop. A sudden, sharp descent that jolted everyone forward in their seats, trays rattling, glasses sliding. Andrea's heart leapt into her throat. This wasn't normal. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice came through the intercom, tight and urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We're encountering unexpected turbulence. Flight crew, take your seats immediately." Andrea looked toward the galley. Rachel was already bracing herself, strapping into the jump seat. Another jolt. This one harder. Andrea gripped her armrests, knuckles white. She'd faced angry investors, a near collapse of $1 billion deal and public humiliation. But none of that prepared her for the helplessness of sitting in the sky while the plane lurched like a paper toy in a thunderstorm. She looked out the window, nothing but dark grey clouds swallowing the wings, no horizon, no control, and then, bang, aye. Metallic shudder shook the cabin. The lights flickered once, then returned. Andrea's breath caught in her throat. Was that lightning? She looked at Rachel. The flight attendant's calm mask had cracked, just slightly. There was a flicker of tension. In her eyes, not panic, but awareness. Something was wrong. The captain's voice came back. We've been hit by a pocket of extreme turbulence. We're rerouting to Lisbon for an emergency check. We are not in immediate danger, but please stay seated. Crew will remain secure. Andrea closed her eyes, focused on breathing. She'd always believed in logic and numbers, but at 30,000 feet, the only thing that mattered was faith. That someone up front knew how to fly this thing through the chaos. Emergency landing in Lisbon was rough, but successful. As the wheels touched down, applause broke out. Andrea didn't join in. She just sat back, letting the tension drain from her body like water from a cracked dam. On the tarmac, emergency crews surrounded the plane. They wouldn't be flying again for hours, maybe longer. Andrea stepped off the jet, her heels clicking softly against the metal stairs. The Lisbon sky was grey but grounded, real, beautiful. She turned around to see Rachel following behind, her blazer slightly wrinkled from the rough ride. "You good?" Andrea asked, nodding toward her. Rachel gave a small laugh. "I've been through worse, but not with a billionaire on board." Andrea rolled her eyes. "I'm still getting used to that label." "Yeah, well," Rachel paused, then added, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you were on this flight." Andrea blinked. "Why?" "Because I think you needed this," Rachel said, looking her directly in the eye. "You've been through a storm on the ground. Now you've been through one in the air. You keep surviving." "That's not luck, Andrea, that's something else." They waited in a small VIP lounge while another plane was prepared. Sasha called, then Ben. Her inbox exploded with concerned messages. The news had already spread. Private jet carrying business tycoon makes emergency landing in Lisbon. Andrea turned off her phone. She needed a minute to sit, to breathe, to let herself feel the fear, the humility, the strange gratitude. She looked out the glass wall toward the runway, the grounded jet still visible in the distance. Everything could have ended mid-air. All the meetings, deals, fights, all the growth. But it hadn't. She was still here, and she wasn't the same woman who had slapped a flight attendant out of arrogance weeks ago. She wasn't even the same woman who had stared down a failing deal 2 days ago. She was better, still healing, still building, but better. The jet incident made headlines for 2 straight days. Andrea didn't ask for the attention, but it found her anyway. Major outlets ran with headlines like, "Tech billionaire's private jet rerouted amid mid-air turbulence." Andrea Simmons, "Calm in crisis or just lucky?" Ben texted her, "You're officially trending. Let me know if you want me to do damage control or lean into the PR boost." She just replied, "Neither. Let's focus on Dubai." Because despite the turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, Dubai was still waiting. The launch of the International Sea division. The expansion that would define the next phase of her company's growth. 100 moving pieces, and one woman at the center of it all. When they finally touched down in Dubai, the air was dry and warm, a welcome contrast to Lisbon's grey skies. The city skyline shimmered like a sci-fi movie set, glass towers stretching into the blue with ambition as loud as the heat. Andrea arrived to a red carpet welcome at the conference center, but she didn't bask in it. She had work to do. Sasha was already there, typing furiously on a laptop near the presentation hall. She looked up and immediately grinned. "You made it. I was this close to giving your speech for you." Andrea smiled back. "Please, next time, go for it. I wouldn't mind an hour off." Sasha raised an eyebrow. After what happened mid-air, I think you earned more than that. Andrea waved her off. Don't jinx me. The world's not done testing me yet. The conference began with a flurry of meetings, panels, and quiet side-room negotiations. Andrea moved through it all with grace and precision, shaking hands, signing documents, answering questions with measured clarity. But something felt different. People looked at her now with more than curiosity. There was respect in their eyes, not because of her net worth, not even because of her title. It was the turbulence, the way she handled it, the way she got back on the plane afterward. Her story wasn't just about money anymore. It was about resilience. That night, there was a private rooftop event with the global partner and other major investors. It was a celebration, luxury food, live music, glowing skyline. Andrea stepped away from the noise for a moment, leaning against the glass railing, looking out over the city. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Ben approaching, two glasses in hand. One ginger tonic for the woman who survived Wall Street, rogue finance analysts, and near death at 30,000 feet, he said with a mock toast. Andrea laughed. You make it sound dramatic. It was dramatic, he said. You've lived more in 6 months than most people do in a decade. She took the drink, thoughtful. You ever think about what we were doing before all this? Ben shrugged. I was pushing paper and pretending it mattered. Andrea smiled faintly. I was chasing titles. Now I don't even care about the title. I care about what we're building. He raised his glass. To building something that lasts. They clinked glasses, the sound soft against the hum of the city. Later that evening, Andrea found herself sitting alone by the rooftop's edge, watching the stars peek through the haze. Rachel appeared with a quiet nod. She wasn't in uniform this time, just a simple dress, no heels. Out of context, she almost looked like a different person. Can I join you? She asked. Andrea nodded. Of course. They sat in silence for a minute, both staring at the lights in the distance. Rachel broke the silence. I wanted to say something, if that's okay. Andrea turned to her. Go ahead. I've flown with a lot of powerful people, Rachel said softly. Some of them talk down to you, some don't even see you, but I've never seen someone change like you have. Andrea's eyes softened. You saw the worst version of me. And now I see the real one, Rachel replied. That's what matters, that and what you do next. Andrea let the words sit for a second. I want to do better, she said. Not just for myself, for everyone who's watching, for the people who never got the seat I was handed, for the ones who were told they'd never fly. Rachel smiled. Then you're exactly who should be in that seat. The night ended with applause as Andrea took the stage to speak to hundreds of guests. The spotlight was bright, but she longer shrank beneath it. She told the story of a woman who had once been angry, reckless, and lost in her own ego. Say a woman who slapped a stranger in first class without realizing she'd just hit the owner of the plane, and how that same woman, through pain, through failure, through turbulence, learned to lead with grace. To everyone watching, she said, into the mic, her voice clear, I want to say you are not defined by your worst day, you are built by how you rise after it. The room was quiet for a beat. Then came the standing ovation. She stood tall, heart full, not because she'd won the deal, but because she'd won herself back. 6 months later, the world had changed again, but this time it changed on Andrea's terms. The international division was thriving, with offices in 5 countries and a team that now spanned the globe. The global partner deal that once teetered on the edge of collapse had turned into one of the most successful joint ventures in her company's history. And the slap heard round the cabin? It had become a footnote, overshadowed by what came after: growth, humility, leadership. Andrea Simmons, once seen as the outsider who inherited power, was now widely regarded as a visionary, leader who had earned every inch of it. But the biggest change of all, she finally felt like she could breathe. It was a quiet afternoon when she returned to her private hangar. No paparazzi, no press, no partners waiting. Just her, walking along the sleek runway where her jet sat gleaming under the late sun. Rachel was waiting by the stairs, smiling in a way that felt easy, familiar. Ready for takeoff, Captain? She teased, Andrea laughed. "I'll leave the flying to you and the actual pilot." They both climbed aboard, the cabin quiet and still. But this wasn't a business flight. It was a moment Andrea had planned for herself. No meetings, no spreadsheets, no deals. Just a simple flight to nowhere, circling back home through open skies. As the engines hummed to life and the wheels lifted off the ground, Andrea looked out the window, the city slowly shrinking beneath her. She thought about that first day, the slap, the mistake, the shame. Then she thought about Lisbon, about Dubai, about confronting Matt, about Sasha and Ben and Rachel, and all the chaos in between. Each storm, each failure, each hard lesson. They'd all built the wings she was flying. It's on now. Halfway through the flight, Rachel walked over with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "You know," Rachel said, "I still tell new crew members that story." Andrea raised an eyebrow. "You mean the story?" Rachel nodded. "The slap, the turnaround, the billionaire who didn't act like one?" Andrea chuckled. "You should probably leave out the part where I nearly derailed an entire global merger." "Nope," Rachel said, smiling. "That's the best part. You didn't just survive the crash. You learned how to fly after it." Andrea sipped her coffee, thoughtful. "Funny thing is, I always thought leadership meant having all the answers, being the strongest person in the room. And now? Now? I know it's about listening, owning your mess, letting people see you bleed and showing them how to keep going anyway." Rachel raised her cup. To turbulence. Andrea raised hers too. To transformation. Later, as the jet began its descent back into the city, Andrea looked down at the sprawling skyline. So many people out there still chasing power, titles, the next rung on the ladder. She understood that chase. She'd lived it. But now she knew. Better. Power meant nothing if you didn't use it to elevate others. Titles faded. But impact, that stayed. And she was just getting started. When they touched down, a driver was waiting, holding a simple black sign that said, "Simmons. No press. No flash." Just another day. As she stepped off the plane, Rachel called out behind her, "Next time maybe let me slap someone." Andrea turned, laughing. "Deal." That evening she returned to her penthouse. The city lights blinked below, and Andrea stood at the window barefoot, wineglass in hand. She wasn't the woman she'd once been. And thank God for that. Now when turbulence hit, on the ground or in the air, she didn't flinch. She adjusted, she rose, because the sky didn't belong to those who never stumbled. It belonged to those who fell and found their wings anyway. Hit. Subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?